Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roan Hunter. Let's jump right in. Roan, another day, another dollar. Is that how that works?
I think so. Because, I mean, you know, the money from this podcast, dude, it's rolling in.
Rolling in.
Yeah.
Almost faster than my two teenage sons can spend it. Right? I've got a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I'm like, I'm literally going to have to make $6 million a year to pay for all of the things that you're involved with.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, dude, here's the good news. It only gets worse.
Oh, thanks a lot. Like every time one of my sons walks to the pantry, I'm like, I cannot afford that.
Oh,
right?
yeah. And then, you know, the goal is, it's like, you know, we tell young couples, just, you know, kids at home, whatever, the goal is the empty nest. Man, with the kids off the payroll. That's the goal. That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I don't know if I promote that idea.
Yeah,
right? At 43, I'm still hanging on. Listen, we don't do this enough, and I think we should do this at the top of this episode. We've named this podcast after a book that you and Eva put out that's Making Waves, and I think we could explain, like, what was the thought process behind the Sex, God, and Chaos idea, and then we can let our listeners know where to go grab that resource.
Yeah, it just certainly, when you look at the culture today and this issue of sex and sexuality, and boy, it is certainly just confusion and chaos. And, you know, the God piece is fundamental, we believe, because, you know, that's the creator of the universe. And he's in it, and sexuality is just so core to who we are as human beings, and just the brokenness that we see, and then the chaos, and really, you know, a big part of it is the chaos of betrayal, because when sexual betrayal occurs in a relationship, it's interesting because it cuts across the human soul, and the response of it is very similar. It doesn't matter, male, female. The reaction and the response is pretty well defined because of the nature and the depth of the hurt in this sexual betrayal.
Yeah, that hurt is cut so deep, and I you know how I've experienced sitting with people in that part of their journey. It's an interesting dichotomy. People who don't even believe in God can be mad at God for allowing those things to happen. So I love the fact that we're throwing that in there, not in a way that's trying to force people to believe in God, but being honest about the fact that when you experience sexual chaos, God is going to be a part of the conversation one way or another, right?
Well, it's just, you know, I believe that, you know, our sexuality is really the most sacred part of who we are, because it's like our Creator placed within each of us, male and female, his greatest aspect of who he is, the ability to create life. And so that sexuality is the most sacred part of a human being. And when it is violated, whether we violated ourselves, looking at porn, thinking that it has no effect, or we are violated by betrayal in some way, shape, or form of a sexual nature, it's a violation of the most sacred part of who we are as a human.
Absolutely. So I just noticed you guys released on social media. The book is now available on Audible.
It is,
which is the preferred method for so many today.
Yeah, right? You know, you young people, you don't know how to read. Yeah, sorry, I just offended all the young people.
Oh my gosh! Well, that's what you do best is offend people. So probably what we should do
equal opportunity offender.
Let's get to before this goes off the rails. Let's get to the guest. So tell us about our guest today.
Yes, today, man, we got a special guest. Marnie Ferree. Marnie is the founder of Bethesda Workshops in Nashville, Tennessee. She's written several books, and she is just a tremendous source of knowledge and truth and wisdom. She's been doing this work for about 30 years now, and man, she is really a pioneer in this arena, and so we are so glad that she's on with us today.
Yeah, like most of our guests, she has her own story that really weaves into the topic, the theme of this podcast. So we're eager for you to hear this interview between Roan and Marnie Ferree.
So we are excited today to be back with you on the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast. And man, we've got a super special guest, somebody that has certainly meant a lot to us, and even in this whole arena that we work in. Marnie Ferree is truly one of the pioneers in the work of everything that we do: sexual addiction, partner betrayal, trauma, on all sides of the fence. She is the founder and director of Bethesda Workshops in Nashville, Tennessee. She's written several books, and man, we are just delighted to have you with us today, Marnie. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Roan. I'm so glad to be with you and appreciate the work y'all are doing. I remember when you and Eva came and sat in to observe all of the Bethesda workshops, and I can just picture your dear smiling faces and presence there with us.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the great things that came out of that, we knew Eli Machen, and
Right.
and that's when I got the first time I'd ever met Jim Kress, and so
Yes.
forever indebted for making that connection, because those two guys are just man, they are world class, and I know they worked with you there at Bethesda for years, and again.
Yes.
Just people that have meant a lot to us, and so
Yes.
Gosh, Marnie, where to start? One of the things we usually just start with is just kind of, tell us your story. And so, kind of how did you get into this line of work, and what led you here?
Well, I always say, Roan, that I didn't choose this work. I believe with all my heart that this work chose me, and it's the result of my own story, like so many of us in this field, us old-timers especially. I was born into a home that was filled with sexual addiction, a dearly beloved pastor, Christian educator dad who struggled all of his life with sex addiction, including with bringing other people into our home who were sexually abusive and exploitive with me. So my mother died when I was very small. So I'm kind of the classic. I identify primarily as a grateful sex, love, and relationship addict, and kind of the classic about that from my generation, at least. Today's generation of women are struggling just as much with plain pornography and all the online stuff as men do. My generation was somewhat more of the relationship, love, addiction kind, and that for sure was my story. Such attachment breaches in my home and in my life, overt 15 years of sexual abuse trauma, lots of family dysfunction. So I have the classic setup for coping, for surviving with very attached, very deep, very connected affairs. Promiscuity, then affairs throughout both marriages, until I entered recovery in 1991, which was prompted by both mental health issues. I was depressed, I was anxious, I was having PTSD symptoms, but also I was diagnosed with cervical cancer caused by HPV. So that's what really got my attention and began a journey in 1991, a first sobriety date in 1992. So out of that story, I wanted to work and help other women and also men, and went back, got a counseling degree, licensed marriage and family therapist, began working in the field, started for what we are aware of at least was the first intensive workshop for women struggling with sex addiction. I would tell Dr. Pat Carnes and then also my dear friend and mentor, Dr. Mark Laser, y'all wrote great books and the pronouns are wrong. So I got to be a missionary for the message of hope and healing for women struggling with sex addiction. So that began in 1997, so 25 years ago this year. We're taping this toward the end of 2022. And ultimately that grew into what today is Bethesda Workshops. So we offer workshops for male sex addicts, for female sex addicts, those are separate, for partners of addicts, then for couples. We have a program for teens who attend a workshop with their parents. It's a systemic family-based program. And then we're just launching a kind of second tier workshop. It's not clinical, but a spiritual direction for specifically working on one's vertical relationship with God. And I'm real excited about that. So I've been doing this work a long time, was very, very surprised personally within the last few years to discover that I'm also the partner of a sex addict. I knew there had been significant challenges in my own 40-year marriage, had done everything I knew to do to correct those, to work on me, to ask God to improve me, to help me, to beg, cajole, plead with, push and pull my husband toward health and healing, which he was not willing or interested in doing. And I finally chose to separate. I found that living in this complete dearth of any kind of connection, and for years and years and years, a very, very challenging 15 last years especially, was replicating the pain of my childhood, of the disconnect, of the not being chosen, of the not being valued, not being seen. And I couldn't live like that anymore. I did not plan to divorce. I just needed to get some structural space, so not structurally be living in a situation that legitimately should have been a connected, intimate, genuine partnership rather than roommates. And I felt such relief about that and was pleased about that, and quite shocked about a year into that separation to make a very accidental discovery, wasn't looking for it, that my husband had been acting out probably for decades.
Wow.
With very clear and irrefutable evidence. And by that point, I was done. So surprisingly, I'm now divorced after having been married for 40 years. This was not ever where I imagined that I was going to be. It was not where I would have chosen to be. And it is health for me. And today, and now for a good period of time, surprisingly to perhaps especially some of your partner listeners, I am living my best life. I am alone. I'm not partner, not in relationship, and I am content and joyful and serene and full and just healthy and very, very, very grateful despite all of the trauma that I went through, like any other partners, around that enormous betrayal and all the years that I stayed. And so I've experienced all of that too, and yet I was so wonderfully positioned to go through all of that by all of my 30 years of work and the clinical knowledge that I have and the work in the field. So I'm surprised to be in this place, and I'm actually very, very grateful. So I'm coming at this from both sides of this issue.
Yeah. Well, certainly that's just a testimony to the work that you've done to be able to, walk through that. Obviously tragic on so many levels, but yet to come out on the other side and certainly be in a good place. And if you hadn't done the work, you probably would have never been able to do that and would have stayed in a marriage that you did need to stay in, because so many partners certainly do that.
Right.
Yes. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that part, because I know that's all fairly recent, or at least in the last couple of years. And
that's correct. It is.
Just another chapter in the story, right?
Another step in the journey.
Oh, yeah.
I found that God is just as faithful on this side of the addictive coin as God is on the other side that I had lived and walked for so long. And so that's comforting and reassuring and a great thing.
Absolutely. Yep. There's hope for in every situation.
That's right.
I think the key for all of us is do your work. Do your work.
Do your work. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Keep doing the work.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. So, one of the things you said just in growing up in the home you grew up in, I often say, because, my mother was having an affair and married, just growing up in that atmosphere where it was very sexualized, certainly before I was even aware of what was going on, because just the nature of infidelity, and my mother had very loose boundaries, and my dad as well. He would make sexual jokes and those types of things, and I think I know for me that was part of the setup, and then of course the impending the divorce and all the other pieces that go along with that. But talk a little bit about the setup, because we talk about that a lot. And I think a lot of times people, when we start talking about family and family systems, it's that fifth commandment, honor your mother and father, is almost like it breeds this kind of sense of family loyalty. And I love, one of the things that, I call them Jimisms, all of Jim's little sayings. But he talks about the fact that what we're doing is just we're naming and we're not blaming. And so talk about the setup and just for the kind of the underpinnings of an addiction, acting out behaviors.
Well, I think as my story and so many of our stories illustrate, sex addiction is not about sex. This is an attachment-based intimacy disorder. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of the textbook, walking, talking, moving, breathing picture of an attachment-bereft person. With my mother's death, with my father's absence in every way. Then you add sexual abuse, which in my case was a very nurturing, loving kind of relationships. I never, ever framed that as sexual abuse until I entered recovery. To understand the exploitation involved in that with this adult man and me. But from that, I learned for myself that sex was the best survival. It was the best nurturer, that no one would nurture me without that. And so all those are classic setups. I think we talk a lot at Bethesda Workshops about there is always honor in telling the truth. And so what we're just asking is for people to break out of their denial, to acknowledge and tell the truth about their relationships. And while it's not about blame, there is legitimately blame that could be assigned. My father, your father and mother, bear responsibility for their own ill health and their either inability or unwillingness to address those things. That's the human condition. And if we are just all about blame, and that is an important part of the journey, that anger, that intensity of the unfairness of this, the unrighteousness, the injustice of this is an important part of getting in touch with that. And all of us need to visit that. And often that involves blaming perpetrators and people who didn't protect or were unhealthy in different ways. But if we stay stuck there, then we stay stuck as a victim. Mm-hmm. But what happens is when we name these things, when we come to understand them, when we can connect the dots between our trauma and our acting out or our trauma and our relationships, because, by the way, newsflash, these entire dynamics apply to partners too. Mm-hmm. They may not be acting out sexually. They may not be unfaithful in different ways at all. And these dynamics are the same. So when we can connect the dots between our belief systems, between how our history informed our belief system, I thought I had to be perfect, or at least I had to look perfect. I thought that no one would choose me, which indeed was the case, including for 40 years of a marriage. I thought that everyone else's needs were more important than my own. All of those were belief systems that I learned growing up. And when we can connect that to how those belief systems, those lies, those false, negative internal core beliefs are impacting current day behavior and relationships, then that doesn't necessarily change things automatically, but that gives us incredible knowledge, and knowledge is power. And that gives us motivation to want to break these patterns and change these things. And that's pretty priceless.
Yeah. Just in talking about partners and the idea or the importance of them beginning to do their own work. And certainly, that's one of the things I appreciate about you is you've certainly been on both sides. And so often, a partner gets stuck in kind of that victim mindset. I mean, they've definitely been victimized. That's very, very real. However, at a point, you've got to make a choice to begin to move into that, to move beyond it. And so, in working with partners, how do you help a partner that is, let's just say, stuck in that place?
Yeah, it's a great question. Of course, partners are victimized.
Yeah.
The betrayal around sex and relationships is bigger than anything else. This is a whole different animal than substances workaholism or anything else. So that is true. But what we tell partners is it's not your fault you got run over by the Mack truck.
Yeah.
It was barreling too fast down the road. It ran the red light, and here you are smashed out and 4,000 pieces on the pavement. And it is still your opportunity. You get to heal. You have to heal unless you want to stay smashed out on the pavement like this for the rest of your life. And so to honor that pain is so important. And I know y'all do a great work about that, and that honoring that partner's betrayal and coming from that model. Bethesda Workshops does that too. And I truly believe this with all my heart. The partner's journey is harder because first you have to do the grieving work and the anger work and trying to make sense of your life and all of that stuff from all the betrayal trauma, and make decisions, learn to set boundaries and all of those kinds of things that honor self, and do all of that work around what someone else has done. And like all of humanity, a partner also has to, if that partner is going to ultimately be her best self, his best self, they're male partners as well, do this deeper work just of humanity. All of us have been wounded. All of us. No one escapes without being wounded. So in addition to this ginormous wound at the hands of the betraying person, a partner has just been wounded by life like the rest of us, including very often in family of origin. So all of that work is the second tier that she has to do, gets to do. And it's a harder journey. It's an important journey. It's a healing journey.
It is. And, I tell the betrayer, the addict, these terms, even I often say, we've got 2 certifications in sex addiction work, and I are one. However, I just don't like the term because, it's our preferred term is sexual brokenness because the entire culture is sexually broken.
Sure.
And it's kind of our umbrella term. And certainly up underneath that, there's a lot of just broken sexuality in the way it manifests. However, at the root of it, as you've already said, it is an intimacy disorder. And in working with couples, we often say, again, comforting the hurt, working with that pain of betrayal that is so necessary and takes time. However, most of the problems that were in the marriage are now just magnified and amplified.
Right. For sure.
Yeah, and it brings it all to the surface, and so this thing that is so devastating can be the very thing that actually brings you to the place of you have the opportunity to have the relationship, the marriage that was intended from the beginning.
Absolutely. It can be the doorway into healing. And I know y'all do so much couples work and have published a great book about couples recovery and those kinds of things. I always like to say it takes two healthy people to have a healthy relationship. Now, one person can destroy a relationship. Sadly, one person can blow it up by himself, by herself, on whatever that looks like. And that's tragic. And though, to have a genuine, healthy relationship, intimate in every way, I'm not talking sexually. There's so many more important forms of intimacy, I think, than the sexual part. And it's going to grow out of all the other forms in the healthiest relationships. But to genuinely create that healthy one flesh union, that healthy, attached, attuned, intimate bond is going to take two healthy people. Because long term, unhealthy will stay with unhealthy. Long term, that's not fun, but usually there's some kind of balance and payoff about that. And it's stable and it works. Again, I don't mean stable like healthy. It just, there's this equilibrium here in this relationship. They know the dance and they just keep doing it over and over and over. Healthy will stay with healthy, and obviously that's what we as humans desire, and that's also God's plan for us. But long term, a really healthy person won't stay with an unhealthy person.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's what happened to me eventually. Just after I was in recovery for close to 30 years, and I just said, I can't do this wasteland anymore. And then, of course, I found out that someone was significantly less healthy than I even thought. But it's just an important systems principle, and it's not pejorative towards partners. It's not blaming them for anything.
No.
It's calling all of us as humans into being the best people that we can possibly be.
Yeah, that it's almost like the two unhealthy people. It's like a three-ring circus. It's a carnival. But their dance kind of works in the way that it works.
It works. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It might be miserable, absolutely miserable, but they've been doing it a long time, and they do know how to do it, and they know what to expect, and they pretty much get what they expect.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But I've seen it. You've seen it. I mean, you've lived it.
I've lived it.
Yeah, healthy. Just if somebody's growing and they're getting healthy and whole, they will not stay with someone that's unhealthy and not engaged in any kind of growth process.
Not long term. Now, for me, it was real long term. But I just kept re-upping with God until finally it was like. Even the God of my understanding said, "Sweetheart, you are free to honor yourself."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, divorce is not the unpardonable sin. So
it's not. It's brought me great freedom, and it's not the best plan for relationships.
No.
None of us would start this off thinking it's not going to work, but sometimes it's the healthy choice.
It's necessary, absolutely. So, in working with men, and I'm just going to use men as just porn addicts, the sex addict. What would you say, Marnie, is just kind of the one most important factor? If you could, somehow, if there was one thing. And you've seen it over the years. It was one thing that needs to be present that's going to determine whether this guy's going to turn the corner and do a 180, not a 360. But what's one thing that you would say is kind of critical in the process?
I always say, we share this at workshops, the demarcation line that we see between the men who make it and those who don't, and not just sobriety, but get to deeper work, are those who are willing to be involved regularly, like multiple times a week, in 12-step meetings.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really what I see. There's not a magic in the meetings, and there's so many more things that have to happen. But today's sex addiction fellowships, generally speaking, understand the connection between trauma and addiction. And so they are welcoming of the counseling work to look at the trauma, to look at the attachment and all those kinds of things. There are 12-step programs around that. Adult Children of Alcoholics is the core of that, which is very specifically looking at dysfunctional families and how many of us were raised. But in the beginning, especially those early years, just to be within the community of other healing people, to learn how to see people of both genders. I am a fan of mixed gender 12-step meetings at a point in recovery, to learn to see other people just as hurting people without all the objectification of self and of others, to learn how to practice boundaries, to learn how to be transparent and vulnerable and tell the truth, how not to judge other people as we want to not be judged either. All of those kinds of things, how to own and deal with your stuff in step 10, how to have a spiritual develop that spiritual relationship in steps 2 and 3. Doing that core work, I think, makes a huge difference. And interestingly enough, it's the thing that many addicts don't want to do. They'll do counseling, and they don't want to be part of a 12-step group. And I think it makes a tremendous difference.
Oh yeah, we always say that the cure for what else is connection. And
yes,
the critical element is like you've got to get connected with a healthy group that's moving in the same direction. And
yes,
that's not necessarily like a church men's group or something.
Right.
Because you've got to be with people that are like understanding what you're dealing with, understanding the work that's necessary in order to get on that path and have others further down the road that can, keep pointing you in the right direction.
Absolutely. If there is a very healthy Christian-based, faith-based support group that is, generally speaking, formed similarly to the 12 steps, that's great. And we just highly recommend, even still, because most of those groups meet once a week.
Oh, yeah.
That you need more than that. And for many of us, this was absolutely true for me. Being in 12-step meetings radically changed my view of God.
Yeah.
It created within me a real hunger and desire for the God of my understanding, which was a loving God, an affirming God, accepting God, a very present with God, which was not the God that I experienced growing up, because it was not the God modeled for me or taught within the church systems of which I was a part. So it's a really wonderful, wonderful thing. I think the 12-step groups or really healthy faith-based groups are your best shot at getting that healthy community, because they're used to the vulnerability. They're used to accepting people, to just saying, keep coming back. all you have to do is have a desire to live in sobriety and in integrity. Keep coming back. And that's an enormous spiritual gift. That's what God says to us.
I often say it's the real Jesus, not the church Jesus. They're
absolutely
very different.
Yeah, I'm not sure the real Jesus would be very pleased with the church Jesus these days. But we would digress about that.
Yeah, we could do a whole series of podcasts around that.
For sure could.
Yeah, there's no doubt. But yeah, it's that idea of you just, because this is an isolating, disconnecting disorder, right? And so if I'm going to change that, I've got to get plugged in with a healthy community. Right. I often say I've been in recovery myself. Mine was 1990, and there wasn't a whole lot out there back in 1990. I tell guys today, man, what's available it's pretty amazing.
Including like this, there's so many ways that you can connect. You don't have to drive to be at a face-to-face meeting, and that's wonderful. I think you mentioned it before, but some wonderful podcasts and different things out there. The opposite of addiction isn't sobriety; it's connection.
It is. That's it. I often say, I'm looking for that magic bullet. That next thing that's going to take all this away. And I've been at this for 32 plus years now.
Yes.
And, that I haven't found
There's
it.
not one. No.
The one thing that I tell guys all the time that it's going to make the difference is getting in a group with other men, other women that are moving in the same direction, and that actually understand this and they get it.
Because see, that's what there in that group, we've lowered the risk of being able to say all of our awful stuff and still be accepted, because that's just the deal. So it helps counteract those false core beliefs that almost all of us who struggle in these ways have. Of, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me.
That's it.
In fact, you'd go running from the room. You wouldn't accept me. You wouldn't help me. And I actually find this is true for partners as well. And partners especially are very reluctant to go to group. But they get the same benefit. And to have another partner who is further down the road, especially who can help with boundaries. I did a lot of work in Al-Anon in years past, just around trying to do work around my desire to control and fix impaired and unhealthy people in my life, and to have a sponsor who could say, that sounds a whole lot like control and not much like a boundary, which is to keep you safe. I'm like, oh wow, really? Of course you're right. So, it's the same. It's the same setup. It's the same healing place.
Oh yeah. Eva, we do a Monday night groups, and I do the men's group, and Eva does the partners group, and boy, you are so spot on. You've been doing this work a long time, and getting a partner to come to group is a challenge. And
yes.
And then they come, and it makes sense. They get triggered because they hear somebody sharing something, and
yes.
And then they bail. And Eva tells them, we tell them, like, you just keep showing up. It will get better because you're going to heal best with others that have similar experiences.
Yes.
Oh yeah. But it is sometimes it's just so hard to get them to, and oftentimes it's like, well, he's the one that did this, he's the problem. And, I don't really need to do this work, or I don't need to go to that group. It's on him.
And at that point, I go back to you've been run over by a Mack truck. He is the one who did this.
Yeah.
And you're the one that's splayed out on the pavement. So.
Oh, yeah.
You want to take yourself to the ER and then to the long-term loving rehabilitation for your heart and your spirit and your body and your belief system. Yeah.
On the one thing that and I think it's certainly a good thing that's happening, we're seeing more of on the female side where, she's been the one that's betrayed. And I think in the past, it's almost like the husband, because of the shame, I think there's a lot of reasons why it was this way in the past. They would not seek help, and oftentimes there would be a pretty quick divorce. But we're seeing more of the females seeking help, and husbands coming with them. And are you seeing that in your world?
We are not. It is still very hard for male partners to seek help.
Yeah.
We have so few coming to the Healing for Partners at Bethesda workshops. We love having them. We welcome them. They're so in the minority. Mm-hmm. It's a very underserved population still. So, we've probably seen just a little bit of an uptick in that.
Yeah.
And not nearly as much. Male partners are just so, it's a whole different deal.
It is.
Culturally.
Yep.
The stigma is worse, all of those kinds of things, and so deserve help and healing. And there are some good resources out there, and it's hard for them to choose to access them because they often are in the minority. And And that's sad
It
because
is.
they need other men who have also been betrayed as well.
Oh,
so
yeah.
community's growing, but not nearly deep enough and fast enough to tap into the enormous need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is a different. It affects men differently than it does, women partners. And I think again, lots of reasons for that. But at least it's being talked about, and there are some resources out there.
Yes. Yes.
For betrayed men partners today
Yes.
that weren't in the past. So
yes, for sure. They're where help for female sex and relationship addicts was probably 20 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Even I often talk, when we started our journey in 1990, and there was just so little out there. And,
right.
And we just wandered in the dark. We had a good counselor, but again, he was a pioneer in Christian sex therapy, not sex addiction.
Right. And those are two different things.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And at that time, probably one of the best people you could see. But,
right.
That's one reason we just that's why we came up with our roadmap. Because at that level of crisis, as you said earlier, I often say, I don't think there's any greater crisis in a marriage relationship than sexual betrayal.
Yes, for sure.
The death of a child, certainly, but
the death of a child. Other than that, there's nothing that compares to it.
Nothing. I often say the betrayal trauma, it proves the existence of God because it cuts across human nature. The response and the reaction and the symptoms are pretty well defined, unless somebody's just already checked out of a relationship. But if they're in it, it just does a number on so many, on such a
it just hits
deep level.
Every single category of humanity.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt. Just let's talk about Bethesda for a minute. I know you've mentioned it. The work that you guys do there is just tremendous. Has been for so many years. And I know you've got you're doing the work with teenagers now, or starting those workshops. Let's talk about that for a minute, because this porndemic is just absolutely devastating an entire generation.
Right. Well, we actually started the program pre-pandemic, so in 2019, and I don't really feel like it's off the ground. Yeah. I know there's such a need for it, and people, when I talk about it or present about it, whether they're counselors, pastors, whoever, like, oh, yes, there's such a need for this. I have so many people. I could fill this thing up. And we have canceled way more of these workshops than we have held. They're gender specific, so teen females come by themselves, teen males come at a separate time by themselves. And guess who's the holdup?
The parents.
The parents.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. The parents. The attitude is, can I send you my 16-year-old kid? No. This is not our first rodeo. We are not putting teenagers in a hotel dealing with these things. And besides, it's not going to help the problem. This is a systemic issue.
Yeah.
So the teen is usually acting out in some manner the dysfunction of the family. Now, on the other hand, legitimately, teens today are even up against it so much more than we were, or even than my kids who are nearing 40 were, just because of our culture. So there's that very legitimate, everybody's truly almost doing it these days. Christian kids, non-Christian kids, sexting, looking at inappropriate stuff, all of that is just the norm. So there is that level, and still, within the family system, there are issues. And we find that by the time a teen gets to us, he or she is really pretty ready to be there. When they hear we're not going to identify you as the problem, we're going to look at everybody in this family system and give all of you tools and a safe place you can really talk honestly with each other, the teens go, Okay, I'm in for that.
Oh, yeah.
But the parents, I'm too busy. Will say some parent, yeah, well, maybe that's part of the problem, or it just that's really the holdup. I don't know that program, frankly, is going to survive. It
Yeah.
just we
Gosh.
keep putting it on the calendar, and again, canceling most of them because we don't have the enough people, and we continue to get calls, but not enough at the times that we're scheduling. So I don't know about that. I know there is a need. We need healthier families. We need families that are genuinely talking about healthy sexuality, way more than don't have sex before you married. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's what the sum total of what we're telling our kids. Talking about healthy relationships, talking about consent, talking about objectification, all of these kinds of things. We need that. And I'd love for Bethesda Workshops to be able to continue to step into that space. And it's challenging.
Yeah, it's such a tremendous need. I often think, what if we could head this stuff off at the pass?
Of course.
Yeah.
Do some prevention.
Yeah.
And we really look at that, the teen workshop. Now, we've got kids who are hugely, they're addicts.
Yeah.
We don't call them that. They call themselves that after a day or so. They're like, hey, man, they don't care about the label anymore. But to be able to get them some systemic prevention would be so wonderful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's just like, parents want their, 15-year-old to come to counseling. I don't work with, adolescents and teenagers, but several of our therapists do. And it's like, well, when are the parents coming? And, that they just want to bring the child and, let the counselor fix them.
And I hope your counselors will say, we're glad to provide services for your 15-year-old. A part of that, a component of that, is mandatory family sessions and sessions independently with the parents and all of that.
It is. Oh, yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's because otherwise they won't do it.
No, absolutely not. As far as Bethesda, just, tell our listeners how to, what's the easiest way to contact Bethesda?
Yeah, thanks. We have a very extensive website, so there's lots of information, even if someone isn't interested in attending one of our specific intensives. There's so much free information on the website. It's Bethesda Workshops, plural with an S, .org, O-R-G. So that's the best place. Emailing is always good. You're also always welcome to call. Those contact numbers and our emails are on the website. We're glad to chat with you and would love to give you a huge jump start, whether you're an addict or a partner in that healing process.
And we certainly highly recommend indoor support. And
thank you. I know you do.
Absolutely. And I know you've written seveul books, right?
A few.
Yeah. No Stones, Out of the Doghouse for Christian men.
Christian men.
Yeah.
Those are the two primary ones. No Stones, Women Redeemed from Sex Addiction. One of the earliest books about women's struggle with sex and love addiction, coming from a Christian perspective. Out of the Doghouse for Christian Men, I adapted a fabulous book by Dr. Robert Weiss for a faith-based audience. It's his core material. I just got to do the fun part, add faith illustrations and talk about the heart. So those are the primary ones. I've written and edited a clinical textbook for treating female sex addicts called Making Advances, Comprehensive Guide for Treating Female Sex and Love Addicts. So those are the primary ones.
Oh, yeah. All excellent resources.
Thank you.
Yes. And Marnie, thank you for taking the time just always fun to sit with you, and just I could do this. We could just go to about 10 o'clock if you're good with that.
maybe another day. Yeah, it's always a joy. I love you and Eva, and so appreciate your work, and it's a joy to be with you today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Just so appreciate you.
Take care.
All right.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.